Welcome to another episode of Transformational Thinkers with Sara Sheehan. Today I sit down with Maria Colacurcio, CEO of Syndio, co-founder of Smartsheet, High Rocks world champion, and mother of 7. Maria's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. Recognized twice by Goldman Sachs as one of the 100 most exceptional entrepreneurs and a pioneer in the fields of workplace equity and AI-driven compensation. In this conversation, we explore how Maria blends her deep family values, entrepreneurial grit, and athletic discipline to lead Syndio in revolutionizing pay equity for some of the world's largest organizations. We dive into the pivotal moments that shaped her leadership, the bold mission that drives Syndio, the challenges and privileges of breaking new ground as a category creator, and the power of change agility in both life and business. Prepare to be inspired by a visionary leader who's making fairness measurable, actionable, and scalable in the modern workplace. Let's dive in. Maria, I am so glad to welcome you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a conversation that I have been very much looking forward to. Maria, I always love to start by asking people to describe themselves in a way that their LinkedIn profile never quite captures. How would you introduce yourself?
I think because family and ritual are so important to me, that's a difficult thing to capture on LinkedIn. And it's something that people have tried to capture over the course of the decade plus that LinkedIn's been blowing up as a professional network. There's so much more to a human than their work. As we age, it becomes more and more important to not define yourself fully by one thing because there's so much opportunity for change agility. And it's just become a mantra of mine that you must approach everything with a mindset of change agility. It could change any minute. So I think what's not represented in my LinkedIn profile is just the richness of life that drives my work. When you think about relationships, you think about parenting, you think about your relationship with your friends, your family, your place in the world as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife. All of that is so critical to how I think about work, and you can't really represent it on your LinkedIn profile. So I think if I were to introduce myself, it's really about the whole human and not necessarily Maria as a CEO.
That is beautiful. The depth in your recognition that we are all so much more than who we say we are is absolutely beautiful. You've been recognized by Goldman Sachs as one of their 100 most exceptional entrepreneurs twice. What does it feel like to be recognized at that level? And what do you think sets Syndio apart in investors' eyes?
The Goldman Sachs Builder and Innovators recognition is really special to me, but so many of the other awards, recognition, things I was given, particularly early in my career as Syndio CEO, were typically tied to gender. So it were things like Fortune's women leaders or women who are innovators, things of that nature. And the Builders and Innovators was one of the first times I was given an acknowledgement that had nothing to do with being one of the best women in the field, but really just one of the best innovators. And I think it really sticks with me as a milestone that we should all be shooting for. I always say that we know women have made more strides in terms of the professional world and being seen as leaders when we can drop the gender moniker. Because you don't have those types of awards and recognition for men, and it's because men are represented more than women. I think the latest stat, even in venture funding for co-founders, is women are getting 4% of the total venture funding, particularly as we think about AI native companies. Even now, more than ever, as one of the leading AI native B2B companies at Syndio, I'm amongst a very small number of women who are leading those types of companies. And I think builders and innovators, I would love to see more women represented at something like that because it doesn't have the moniker of female or women. And that's really what we're all striving to achieve.
That is a remarkable statistic that 4% of funding is going to companies led by women.
It's very small, and it's actually smaller now that we're in this AI native world. There's very few of us that are running companies that could truly be considered AI native.
That is fascinating. Before we dive into Syndio itself, I would love for you to take us back a little bit. You co-founded Smartsheet, which is a fascinating company as well. It went public in 2018. What did that experience teach you about building something from scratch, and how did it shape the CEO you are today?
The early days of Smartsheet were really influential in terms of my career and how I lead. It wasn't my first startup. I had worked at startups previously, a couple in the Silicon Valley area. I then spent time at Microsoft and had worked for a CRM company that was later stage. So it wasn't my first startup experience, but it was my first experience starting from the absolute very beginning, starting from an idea and really approaching this process of how do you turn an idea into a thing. The biggest thing I learned, number one, was you can do hard things. And I think that's really important as you think about the process and the process versus the outcome. When you look back at an experience like that, it's really the process that you look back upon fondly. And I think the other thing in retrospect, and I think about this in two totally different ways. So you have the Smartsheet analogy where you go through the trenches and you go through 2007 when we're a 3-year-old company and you've got the financial crisis and all these crazy things. You go through this incredibly almost traumatic, in a professional sense, period where we realized our UX, so the way that folks were interacting with our software, had to be totally scrapped and started over from scratch. And that was a very jolting moment of realization. But I think about perspective, because looking back, those were some of the times I think about with the most affection, the most fondness, because we were so in it together. And I remember running a focus group to try to figure out why were we getting so much traction in our free trials, but nobody was sticking with the software. They were abandoning it. And when we sat around and watched people, we did just $50 and some pizza and beer focus group. And as we watched people use the software, it was very clear that they didn't know what to do. So you've got me and a bunch of our engineers standing behind a human with a very simple list of things to do in Smartsheet, in the software. And we're all trying to guide them in the right directions. Like when you bowl, you're like, nope, the button's over here. We sat on the carpet because at the time we were running the business out of a home. It was zoned commercial residential. And we realized we've got to start over. We've got to scrap this entire front design because it's not working. And it's not so much making it through that, because every single startup has a story like that or multiple. Most startups, I think the stat there is only 1% get to 10 million in ARR. That whole first several years is really momentous in terms of the ability to get over the hump. But to me, the big learning is in the perspective, in looking back and realizing those were the moments of the journey that you think about in retrospect and you really treasure. And I think the same is true for me with parenting. I have 7 kids, one's 5, one's 18. And when I think about the perspective I now have raising the 5-year-old, it's with so much affection and longing for the things that happened when the 18 and 17-year-olds were small. So I get this incredible gift of, like, you see these memes where they're talking about, imagine if you woke up today and you're 20 years younger and your kids are little, and wouldn't that be so amazing? And I get to live that every single day, professionally and personally. I get to live with the perspective of knowing what matters and knowing what I'm going to look back on and treasure. And that's a pretty remarkable gift.
It truly is. And the comment about seeing the value in doing hard things is a wonderful thing to reflect on, because I think today people need to hear that more than ever. Doing something hard and working at it has tremendous value.
It does. I am a huge fan of Steve Magnus, and he has a book called Do Hard Things. And talks a lot about the process and talks a lot about mindset and talks a lot about the governor in your mind that holds you back and the various ways to approach things that are difficult that you feel are out of reach and how much your mental attitude actually overcome or not.
It is a wonderful thing to embed in your life, to be able to work at something and achieve it that was harder than you expect. So let's shift into talking about the origin story for Syndio. Syndio was founded on a mission to eliminate pay inequity. That is a bold declaration. Where does that conviction come from for you personally? Was there a moment, an experience, or something that made this feel urgent?
Yeah, I'll start with what we're doing now and what we really began 18 months ago. So the company's been around 8 years and yes, was founded on that premise. But I think there's almost a refounding moment that happened 18 months ago. And it's really critical to how we think about the way that we move forward. And that moment was this confluence of two things that were happening. Number one, there was an acceleration of pay transparency legislation, particularly in areas like the EU, with the EU Pay Transparency Directive, requiring 27 jurisdictions to report on gaps where they had over a 5% gap, create action plans. There are elements like right to information where employees can request comparable pay, things of that nature. And that was going headlong into this incredible opportunity with AI transformation. And at that moment, we also had a pretty incredible shift in the US, incredible from the perspective of very big. In the new administration coming in, a bunch of executive orders and companies being really confused about what's a quota versus a goal as it relates to representation. What water does the EEOC hold? How should I be approaching things like pay equity, which is you cannot pay someone less because of something like gender or race, which holds true in Title VII and has been really steady. But what happened when all of those things were happening, there was this chaotic situation in the US where companies weren't sure which way to go. You had acceleration really moving in the EU and also with states saying you had to post pay ranges, good faith pay ranges, then a job advert, and then AI transformation. And so I think what we came to as a company was we can no longer remain a wedge that's focused just on pay equity because the US market is really taking a hit. There's a lot of confusion and chaos. You've got changes in the EU market, which we want to double down on and drive momentum. But overall, we really need to decide who do we want to be? Who we want to be is a company that's taking everything that AI has made possible, embedding that in the very foundation and architecture of our solution to give companies the opportunity to make really smart pay decisions that are compliant, but also optimized. And I think that was the big opportunity for us to unlock a huge trajectory, a ton of momentum, and a much bigger addressable market. Because now we're no longer just saying, if you pay people correctly from day one, you can reduce your likelihood of having to go back and fix pay gaps that are because of something like gender or race. But now with AI, you can absorb so much information if you build this architecturally correctly. You can start to look at how are your pay decisions, your pay philosophy, the premiums you're adding to whether you hire certain folks at certain rates, how are those tied to business outcomes? And that's really the promise that I think companies have never had in their hands, the ability to do this in a systemic way. That was the big turning point, was how do we expand and become more than just pay equity while systemically building this in a way that really it's our role and responsibility to do so. Because if you let AI run ungoverned, if you let these pay decisions run ungoverned, you're now not just at the whim of human discretion, which is all over the place. As we know, humans are wonderful creatures, but we have bias. But you're also embedding that into AI systemically. So some company needs to intervene and start to provide guardrails and recommendations that then go into the hands of human judgment, but that can be tracked and followed to see if they're moving toward outcomes. So I would say that is the moment where we felt very compelled that we don't want this to run amok. We want humans to be in the loop. We want human judgment to be important, but we want it to be guided so that you can reduce gaps, yes, of course, but also reduce pay waste and drive premiums toward what the business is trying to achieve. So it's a huge opportunity and unlock for the refounding of Syndio with this expanded mission.
I can only imagine that it's resonating with clients as well, because we're providing the guidance to help them make the best possible decision about not only pay ranges for roles, but it's quantifiable data that they can reference legally, correct?
Absolutely. It's quantifiable data, and it starts to, when you think about leveraging AI, what you're doing is you're building the architecture to capture coherence. And I use that word intentionally because when you think about memories, when you think about the reasons decisions are made, right now that's completely lost. And so if I have a candidate and I believe they're a special snowflake, must have them, going to go way out of range to capture and grab this person, that's perfectly fine. I have my reasons for doing that. But in today's world, those reasons are completely lost. And if and when that candidate succeeds or fails, you don't have any learnings to apply back to making better decisions next time. And that's really key to what we're doing now.
You're going to absolutely revolutionize compensation, and I'm so excited for what you're doing. You describe yourself as a first-time CEO when you joined Syndio. That's a candid and courageous thing to own. What made you say yes to the challenge when many executives might have taken a safer path?
Honestly, it was the support from my husband and my family, my kids. They were so supportive, and they, in many cases, each of them to a person, other than the little ones, came back at me with sentences and advice that I had given them in terms of, you need to try things that you think you can't do. You need to experience things. You need to, like all of these catchphrases that I had been using in parenting their whole lives came back around and were put on the table in front of me. And I think for me, the support of my family is critical when you're taking a big leap like that, because if you are taking on a role that you've never done before, and you're also an achiever, you're a person who has high standards for themselves. I have a really strong work ethic, have had it since I was a kid. You know that there's going to be sacrifices. You're going to have to make sacrifices. And the people with whom you're having that conversation to make the decision are the ones who will feel the sacrifice most intimately. To me, it was really having their support was number one, and having that frank conversation about, here's what this might feel like for our family. Here's how everyone's going to have to step up and play bigger, different roles. And that was critical for me, was that I had that support. And once I knew I had that support, it was really the internal monologue and dialogue about, can you be open to change? And I think I have that conversation with myself every year in terms of, am I exhibiting change agility? Am I leading the way someone needs to lead for the organization and what it requires right now and into the future? And I think leaders need to be really smart about this. There's a time and a place for people to lead companies, and there's a time and a place for them to step aside and let others lead it. And so if you don't have that constant conversation with yourself about, am I exhibiting the change agility needed in order to evolve to the degree that the business needs me to get to the next phase? If I'm not, I need to step aside. Just knowing that I have a team behind me, in my family, in my support system, that's always going to challenge me to have those self-aware conversations, that's the key.
That is a remarkably healthy point of view, to be so aligned with understanding what change agility means for you personally and professionally, and having the strength to be able to reflect on it and make your next best decision. So healthy. Syndio is described as having built the pay equity category. What does it actually take to define a category that didn't exist before from a product, market, and culture standpoint?
We did it at Smartsheet too. So it's difficult to remember now because it seems like eons ago. But when we co-founded Smartsheet, there was no online spreadsheet. The closest thing was Microsoft Project. There was nothing collaborative where teams could do work together. Now, that world seems so far in the rear view, but at the time, it was a remarkable shift and a category creation to think about work management differently. So taking a lot of that into Syndio, category creation is about, at its core, it's about momentum. And momentum is energy. I think so many things have to do with energy. And quite frankly, optimism is the superpower that drives momentum and energy. But when you start to get traction with an idea, with a category, thinking about pay equity and really workplace equity as something that's not just for consultants and law firms to look backwards and find and fix. Start to gain momentum around the topic and the theme. People start to listen. There's people that come out of the woodwork that want to help you. And your message starts getting across, and it starts getting across in a way that's very powerful, and it creates opportunities, and then one opportunity to the next. So I think the key for CEOs is to identify when you have that momentum. And when you have that momentum, you need to go all in to own the category, own the narrative, really push yourself and your company as the leader and drive that forward with your customers at the helm, always thinking about their needs and that you're solving their problems and expanding the solution set in a way that they're leading you, as well as your own innovation from your team. My team is incredibly innovative, particularly now in this new world. And so it's not just about customer feedback, it's about pairing that with the innovation of your team. Then identifying when you have that momentum, how to just capitalize on it. And then when you don't, I think that's just as critical, because a lot of companies and CEOs in particular make the mistake of running themselves ragged and being out on the speaking circuit, doing podcasts, doing a bunch of press when they don't have that momentum. And if you don't have the momentum yet, if you don't have the customers, if you don't have the idea that you're actively turning into a thing with innovation on your team, it's just wasted time and wasted energy. If you look back to the last 18 months in Syndio's history, we hunkered down. We weren't doing a lot externally because we were identifying with customers and with our own team, what is the innovation? What is the idea that we're going to take and drive into a thing to serve our customers' next set of needs? And when you're in that ideation, innovation process, that's not the time to think about category creation. It's once you have it landed and nailed and your customers have validated it and you know you have product market fit, you start to feel momentum, you start to get those early adopters, you start to feel that snowball rolling. Very much a timing thing, as much as having the right message, having the right marketing, having the right brand presence. All of that's important, but timing is the most important.
That definitely aligns with my perspective on making sure that you have a group of customers that are very bought into your strategy and want to go the distance with you. That kind of momentum is irreplaceable. When you think about the organizations trusting you with their most sensitive compensation data, brands like Walmart, Microsoft, Salesforce, American Airlines, just to name a few, what is the weight of that responsibility and how do you carry it?
It's immense and so critical and so important. And that's why we've spent so much time and have domain experts embedded across our teams, whether it's data science, data engineering, our domain experts that deeply understand the legislation that's coming out. We have folks that know Sweden's 300-page pay transparency draft inside and out so that we can productize elements of that and give our customers what they need in terms of reporting. It is such a massive responsibility and one we take so seriously because, again, it feeds back into our mission. When you think about how we're embedding everything into our platform from an architecture perspective, you have to build in the elements of, as an example, the EU-AI Act into how you work. It's not a bolt-on. When you think about transparency and algorithms and showing your work from within your platform, that's something that has to be done at the foundation level. And so companies and products that are cutting corners on governance around AI, they're not getting through the enterprise rigor that now exists everywhere. So for some of our customers, when we've been putting our AI and our agent through their rigorous process, there's 7 different committees. So if we don't have everything buttoned up in terms of bias controls and making sure you can't, if you're making a pay recommendation, you can't let it slip whether the candidate is female or male. Those are things that really matter because the generic LLM would change the answer. Or you're looking at the EUAI Act, which requires any pay recommendation. You can actually see this is why it is what it is. This is the policy that you have in place that's documented. This is the market range and the weighting for that market range. This is the internal compression that you would create if it were a little bit higher or lower. All of that, it's just showing your work, thinking about it like a math problem in middle school. And all of that is so critical. So it's not just this cliche comment of course, we take this very seriously. It's compensation data, it's employee data. You actually have to follow through and embed that in the very foundation of your architecture because it has to abide by so many of these rules and regulations so for the customer to have confidence. And I think if you cut corners, you're going to find very quickly that you're not going to make it through many of these councils and AI reviews because they're getting quite rigorous, as they should.
They definitely should. And the thought that you have your work shown to that level of detail is only going to increase customer confidence in your current customers and your future customers.
Absolutely. We can tell folks that we have a large financial services customer and we are the only tier 1 high risk. And this is, again, the terminology is EU oriented mostly when they talk about high risk. It's technologies, AI technologies that are addressing things like compensation and employee data. And we are the only agent that's been approved through their councils to be at that level of risk and what they call a tier 1 agent. So the more of that we start to see, again, creates momentum around just pure governance because a lot of companies are having this discussion about should they build or should they buy? Should they build something internally where they know they can have control or should they buy something? And if so, what is the bar in order for those vendors and partners to have to overcome to be a part of their AI transformation? It's a very high bar and it's getting higher.
Very impressive that you are the one and only approved vendor in your space. That is very impressive. Syndio's platform is supported and underpinned by Syndio, AI that delivers real-time pay recommendations in tools like Teams and Slack. Walk us through how the idea was born. At what point did you realize that AI wasn't just a feature, it was the future of the company?
It's a great distinction because, again, when you look at our architecture, AI really Syndio spans all of our products. So we have our essentials products, which are really the ones that help companies ensure they are compliant. So that could be the reporting, global pay reports. It could be pay equity analyses, which you still want to do. Some companies are doing this twice a year. Some are doing it quarterly. Some are doing it once a year. And then you have the decisions platform. And Syndio runs across all of that. So you've got Syndio providing insights, if you want them, around things like comp consistency. So let's say you want to go into the platform and ask a question about, we're hearing chatter from a particular set of functions or teams that people coming in are coming in at higher pay than the people who are here. And people are getting frustrated. Giving folks in compensation, giving managers the ability to leverage AI to identify, is this true or not? Is our policy around valuing tenure playing out in the real world, or is it not playing out? And then bringing to bear some of our insights and analytics and data visualizations by leveraging AI. So that's one example of how Syndio kind of crosses the platform. In Essentials, when you think about pay decisions, this is just such an obvious way to expand on a product that we launched in 2021. So we launched the early version of Decisions in 2021, but this is before we had the AI native foundation that we rebuilt into our architecture. And what it did was very simple. Starting pay is the biggest factor in any pay equity analysis. And so what Payfinder did is when a new hire offer was being made or a promotion or a transfer, it would simply take the pay equity analysis to give an equitable range side by side with whatever the market range was. So what that would do for companies is it would, again, guide the discretion in the moment of decision making to ensure they weren't creating or opening up new gaps. And there was one key value proposition to that solution. It was prevent new gaps from happening. Found the gaps, you fixed them with our software, you've identified insights into the policies, you've paid out remediation, typically to the tune of millions of dollars a year. You don't want to pay that bill again next year. So you need to make sure that any offers, promotions, transfers that happen are not just competitive, but also fair. And so that was the very wedge use case for that solution. When we went back and rebuilt the architecture in order to support AI technologies, we identified that Syndio could also really get smart about, again, making those pay decisions not just compliant, but optimized. How can we create that feedback loop where Syndio now can make recommendations as to are the policies working or not? Are they driving business outcomes? But continuing to also provide that capability of making sure they're competitive and fair, but also now optimized. And that's one of the beauties of AI, because you can pull in your applicant tracking system, you can pull in your HRIS or your employee data set, you can pull in competitive and market pay, you can pull in your policies, your performance reviews, all of these things to just broaden that value proposition to now one of, are we paying for the things that matter to the business? And so that's really exciting to be able to go from, are we paying in a way that's going to create new pay gaps or reduce them, to that, and are we paying in a way that drives the business forward?
Yes, if you're increasing individual commitment based on being highly equitable, that is a magical thing to be doing for an organization. Because if people want to show up even more, they're very motivated, they're going to be much more likely to do something that's hard and literally make a difference at work. Maria, pay decisions are among the most sensitive and high-stakes actions an organization can take. How do you build the AI that leaders actually trust? What does responsible AI look like in your context?
It's showing your work. It's making sure your algorithms are transparent. It's ensuring you have the rigor under the hood to hold steady the anti-bias guardrails. It's all of those things that I think play into ethical AI and responsible AI.
You're now governing pay decisions for 10 million employees across 100 countries. How does AI make that scale possible? It's mind-boggling to think 10 million employees across 100 countries. And what would that look like without it?
We've been in business for 8+ years. And I think because we've been managing something so specific and important as pay equity, we've garnered tremendous trust from our almost 400 enterprise clients. And because of that trust, that's really what's giving us the springboard to embark upon this expansion where we're applying AI to pay recommendations. Without the trust and knowledge that we have that governance layer and that we're so good at embedding the governance layer for things like seeing around corners and compliance and legislation and what's coming in terms of requirements globally and in the US, because the US state-sponsored transparency legislation is starting to pick up as well. But when you think about now applying AI to recommendations for that many companies to impact that many pay decisions, your customers first have to trust and believe you that you are going to start with accuracy. When you think about pay equity, this is something that must stand up in a court of law. If you're thinking about companies who have pay equity class actions or plaintiff case or EOC demands or issues, so many companies trust us that our information is accurate and correct to the tune of dollars that they are saving from avoided litigation, brand risk, all of those things. To do this with AI, you have to start from that place of trust. I think it would be really difficult to start from scratch and try to enter a market where you're providing compensation recommendations without that background of trust. which we built.
And you started at the right place. You started at eliminating discrepancy and poor pay decisions at the outset. You've expanded on what you're doing by including AI and making it even more relevant for your customers.
Along the way, we learned so much about compensation and policies and trends and outliers and why companies pay what they pay and how many of our customers are actually still paying for education. It's not unlawful to pay people differently, but you have to have reasons why. And we have so much data around, because when you think about a pay equity analysis, you control for things. Again, that speaks to it's not unlawful to pay people differently, but you have to have reasons, disciplined reasons why. So we also have so much information and data to provide benchmarks and best practices to our customers to say, fewer companies are controlling for education. So what that means is education is becoming less of a reason for pay in these particular verticals. That's an example of something that we could share with our customers and something that we've learned that perfectly positions us to take on this next phase.
You recently announced a major expansion of Syndio's leadership team. Just this month, in fact. 7 new leaders in a short window, including your president, Eric Darby, new CFO, CTO, and SVP of marketing, among others. What triggered this wonderful team expansion? Was it a strategic pivot, a growth milestone, or something else entirely?
It plays into what we talked about before. So we had this moment, this hunker down, heads down moment of really rethinking our architecture and our product and where we want to go with this incredible confluence of transparency and AI transformation. And the first thing we had to do before we brought in a new set of leaders was really validate that with our customers. So we spent a tremendous amount of time in conversations. I think I was in over 60 personal calls with 60 of our customer accounts. So again, not people, companies, where I was personally able to walk them through the vision and get feedback. And to me, that type of vetting is really critical before you invest in and bring on a new set of leaders that are of the caliber that we've brought on. At that point, it's really critical that you think about what worked for the company to get from the beginning to now. And again, what's going to work for the company to get from now to our future goals, which are big and meaty and audacious. And so once we had really vetted that this was the right solution, that our expansion was headed in the right direction, we had the backing of our customers. They wanted to see us do this. We had customers that were raising their hand to be design partners and early beta customers. That's the moment when you then need to invest in the right type of leadership. I think in the early days, I'm very much of the athlete mindset. So thinking about, you can take a great athlete and apply them to anything. You can take that Swiss Army knife, somebody that has change agility, somebody that is smart. They don't have to necessarily be that deep functional expert, but you do get to a point in a company's trajectory where you need some of that deep functional expertise. The new SVP of marketing is a perfect example of that. She came in and built a team, and via muscle memory, just because she's done this so many times and she has such incredible muscle memory, but deep functional experience, she was able to hit the ground running in days, not months, days. And I'm seeing that across these new leaders. They're able to pick up the business and what we do. It's not taking them months, it's taking them days to draw upon their deep well of expertise and hit the ground running and start making an impact on the business. That's what you need at this phase.
It's also great that you have the right individuals, the right personalities, and the right skills all at the same time. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about your champion mindset a little bit, because I think this is a fascinating part about you and your personality. You are a High Rocks world champion, age group gold world record holder, and you and your husband, Brandon, placed first in the U.S. and 5th globally in the pro doubles at the Nice World Championships. For people who haven't heard of High Rocks, give us the 30-second version of what's the sport and how on earth you are able to be a CEO of a fast-growing enterprise company and compete at this level?
It's so funny to see the evolution in the sport. So all of my world records, by the way, have been broken. So none of them stand anymore, just to be very clear. But the sport is really fun. It's hybrid racing, essentially. So it's a combination of strength stations and fast running. And ultimately, if you want to describe it to someone, it's running while completely exhausted, tired, and with your muscles full of lactate. So it consists of 8 1-kilometer runs and then a bunch of strength stations. You can do it alone at a lighter weight, which is the open division. You can do it alone at heavier weight, which is the pro division, or you can do it as a team of 2, either women, men, or mixed. So my 2 categories are I do pro individual by myself at the heavier weights, and then I do mixed doubles with my husband. And I have also done mixed doubles with a colleague where we actually broke the world record for mixed doubles that particular year. It's also been rebroken. We started this in 2022. It was really interesting. My husband owned a gym in Seattle, and he was struggling to get people back in post-COVID because everyone was situated in their garages and doing Peloton and things like that. And we had a couple fits and starts. It's hard to remember now, but people came back in droves, really creating that in-person community. And then Omicron drove everyone away again. And that was sort of it. It was very difficult to get people back. And so we found this fitness competition. He found it. It was very big in Europe. It had just really started coming to the US. And this was in 2022. And he said, let's train for 6 weeks and go do it and see if this could potentially be something we could bring to the gym and start training people and getting people excited about coming back and having a goal. So we did it in May, and I won the overall and did it alone. And so then a week later, I competed in the World Championships, not really knowing anything about the sport. I won the overall in May, and one of the organizers was like, hey, you qualified for the World Championships. And I said, what does that even mean? He said, well, it happens to be next week. And I was like, might as well do it. And so then at the first World Championships I've ever competed in, I won my age group, which again, today I would get crushed. The sport over the course of the last 4 years has absolutely exploded, and it's so much more competitive. So when you think about a season, I tend to do 1 or 2 regional events. And then if I'm lucky, you have to win a regional event to qualify for Worlds. So this year I qualified as a pro individual. I won Vancouver. And then my husband and I qualified as mixed doubles. So you have to win a regional, you get to go to Worlds and compete with the best of the best. And it's just, again, going back to doing hard things, I think it's really important to put yourself in a place where you have goals, they're really aspirational, and you push yourself. There's something about pushing yourself to try to achieve a goal that's well out of your reach that changes the way your brain thinks about what's possible. And I have learned so much about my governor in terms of that voice that tells you you need to slow down, you need to stop. Being able to have internal conversations where you overcome that voice, that expands so far beyond what I do in the gym. It really does translate to work, because as an entrepreneur, as a co-founder, as a CEO, there are so many moments where you just feel like you're done. You feel like you've hit a wall. And to be able to overcome and push through that by drawing upon this resilience that you've built over and over and over again in a physical space is a pretty remarkable capability, and something that really motivates me to keep going.
That's great. I can't agree with you more that being able to put yourself in a position where you're going back to training, you're giving yourself space and time, you're practicing, it allows you to reflect while you're doing it, and you can allow yourself to get better by just showing up and practicing. It's phenomenal at how it can show up at work and help you be clearer, help you be kinder, and more in touch with the people that you're actually working with. Let's talk about what comes next and what your vision for the future is. Syndio's newest framing is decision intelligence for pay, moving beyond compliance into governing every pay decision every day in real time. What does that world look like in 5 years, and what has to change for it to become the default for global enterprises?
The opportunity is massive, because the opportunity is about pay decisions that are, yes, compliant, but again, optimized and tied to business decisions and business outcomes. And that's the gap we've had for decades. I was with a group of customers in Boston last week, and we were talking about pay for performance. And there was one gentleman who is an expert in compensation. I think he runs the Boston Compensation Association. And he said he's been doing this since 1981. And since 1981, there's been this pendulum swing of the 9-box and performance reviews and how do you coach managers to get better feedback and distribution? And do you want wide distribution, tight distribution? Anyway, we've been having this conversation forever and ever and ever. Mm-hmm. And the heart of it is, how do companies become more oriented around performance? And it requires a whole subset of things. But one of the pieces that's been missing that we can provide is, are the pay policies and the premiums that you apply actually driving business outcomes? Are they driving performance? And I think it's really interesting to think about that in terms of what's possible, because we put so much of our time and energy into work, and it's really a trade. We'll trade our labor for some sort of package of rewards in return. And when you ask people, why are you paid what you're paid? People can't articulate it well. And I don't think companies can articulate it well. And if they articulate it well, then looking at their data and analyzing whether they're consistent about those policies and premiums, that's a whole nother story. Very few companies who say they're pay for performance actually are, because it's really difficult to make that connection. And so if you think about the opportunity of making something transparent that's been siloed and really black box, but has so much importance to people. This is our livelihood. This is what we're trading our time for. And time is the only asset that you can't get more of. You can't buy more time. And so if you think about what companies could achieve by getting really clear about what they value, it's the lens through which they send messages to their employees. And if you think about promotions, it's the perfect, most visceral example of this. When someone gets promoted at a job, it is a message to everyone in the organization about what that company values. So if the wrong person is promoted, if they're moved up too many levels, if their pay is off, it's sending a message that this is what we value. If the person is toxic or has a terrible way of working or demeans their colleagues, you're sending a message that that's what you value. But a lot of companies don't have that information. They're working on one manager's discretion, and the manager has a very small viewpoint in terms of what they've experienced with that particular person. So I think the opportunity here is massive.
I think the opportunity is enormous. I really do. I'm so excited to see the difference that you're going to make in the workplace. I can't wait to see how your company is doing in 10 years. Because you already have momentum right now. And I can't wait to see the cultural change that you're going to influence.
Amazing. Thank you.
I really appreciate your time today.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Here are the top 3 takeaways from today's discussion. Optimism fuels category creation. Building something from scratch, whether it's Smartsheet or Syndio, is about harnessing momentum and energy. Optimism is the superpower that creates traction behind new ideas and innovation. Responsible AI is non-negotiable. As Syndio expands globally, governing pay decisions for 10 million employees across 100 countries, responsible AI isn't a feature, it's the foundation. Transparent algorithms, ethical guardrails, and showing your work are essential for trust at scale. Change agility is a must-have. Maria's leadership mantra is all about change agility. Personally and organizationally, leaders must continually reflect, am I evolving fast enough to take us where we need to go? If not, is it time to step aside? I give huge thanks to Maria for sharing her wisdom and tremendous authenticity. To my listeners, please leave ratings and reviews on your listening platform of choice. And please share the show with someone you care about. Thanks so much for listening.